A guard on the wall of the royal capital puts a spyglass to his eye, and what he reports back is that there are 100,000 monsters coming, and he would like somebody to explain what anybody is supposed to do about a number like that. Every adventurer in the kingdom is standing in front of that gate, 4 great clans. Every S rank the guild could scrape together, the entire army, and the first person to climb the wall is a 16-year-old in a black hood who tells all of them to step back, then pulls 2 rocket launchers out of thin air. He empties both into the horde, throws them away, produces a machine gun, asks the front rank of the goblin charge what they think about this, and opens up. Down on the field, the leader of the strongest team in the kingdom watches that happen and asks whether that is his ability, which is a fairly reasonable question, because 2 years ago she personally threw him out of her team for not having one. What none of them know is that the boy on that wall spent his entire adolescence being told his blessing did not exist. Not that it was weak, that nobody, including the guild master, including the Book of Blessings itself, could tell him what it was or how to switch it on, and that the day it finally answered him, he was lying in a swamp with his face opened up, bleeding out under an ancient dragon, in a place his childhood friend told him to go. To get how the most useless adventurer in the kingdom ends up being the only thing between 100,000 monsters and a capital city. We gotta go back to the day he turned 12. It starts with a girl named Sasha touching a book whose pages start turning by themselves and stopping on Sword Master. She runs straight to a boy named Hayes to boast about it, and he is genuinely delighted for her and congratulates her. She smiles and tells him it is his turn now. He agrees and says he is certain he is going to get something amazing too, and then they go on adventures together. She says that puts them one step closer to their dream. And to explain what that dream is, we go back further to a cemetery, where the two of them are standing in front of graves and she is crying and calling for her parents. He holds his own tears in, says her name, and tells her that together the two of them are going to build the best and strongest team in the world, and then help so many people that nobody else ever has to go through what they just went through. Back at the ceremony, the guild master Geist calls him up. He walks toward the book smiling, running the rules in his head. Blessings are powers handed down by God. People in this world are baptized and receive a blessing by the time they turn 12. To find out what your blessing actually does, you read about it in the Book of Blessings, and understanding what a blessing is happens to be the exact thing that lets you use it. So he takes the last step and thinks that for the sake of that dream, this is where it begins. The book opens on Weapon Master, and Geist looks at it with a puzzled expression and asks what that is. Hayes turns around and asks him the same question. Geist asks to see it, comes closer and does not know either, and asks what it means, which stops the boy cold, because if even he does not know, that cannot be. Geist confirms the situation out loud anyway. Nobody knows what his blessing is, which means he cannot use it. 2 years later, they have a team called the Saints, and Hayes is walking at the back of it under a backpack full of everybody else's equipment, breathing like a man about to fall over. The vice captain, Reynold, pats him on the shoulder with a friendly smile, says his name and asks whether he is still holding on, and says he is sure they are almost there. Hayes says he is fine and can keep going. Reynold agrees with that, and Sasha announces they are taking a break here and continuing in 30 minutes. He says her name loudly and starts to say he is fine and they can keep moving. He does not finish because she asks what happens if he faints out here. Who covers for him? If everybody has to carry the luggage, how does anybody fight? Piazzolla, Tycoon, and Robin are on this team too, and they look at the boy with a backpack bigger than he is and remark that he does not even have a blessing, and he is saying things like that. Robin offers to carry some of it. Everything will be fine, right? Sasha refuses her and says their current task is a very important deciding factor for the team's rank increase. Robin is their archer. Nobody makes the archer's job harder. She starts to object, looking worried. And Hayes thanks her and says that however he can handle at least this much. She says his name and tells him to just rest. So he puts the backpack on the ground and does the arithmetic. 2 years since the blessing. 2 years since they built this team. And over time the team has grown. Reynold says he simply cannot use his abilities yet. Somebody says he is such a nice guy, isn't he? And Hayes stands off to the side and finishes the arithmetic, which he does not enjoy. The Saints are currently a B rank team. Sasha is currently an individual A rank, and he is somebody who cannot use his blessing carrying the luggage. Reynold comes over, pats his shoulder, and tells him not to let it break him and to rest. He agrees, and then Reynold walks off to a clearing and calls the leader over and asks how Hayes is doing. He says the boy looks quite exhausted, although he thinks they will manage just fine. And then he asks whether she has made a decision. She agrees that she is, with a very sad expression. They reach the target, which is the lair of an A-rank Queen Cobra, and killing her is the job. Sasha lays it out calmly. She enters first and starts the fight. Tycoon and Robin provide support. Reynold guards the rear. Piazzolla stays back because she is the healer. Hayes says her name loudly and asks what about him. She says he waits here. He is not happy about that, and she says they begin as planned and asks for support magic. He stands behind them and runs the theory through his head, because certain blessings let people call on a force called magical energy, and magical energy is what lets you use magic. Piazzolla's blessing is Sage, which allows healing and magic both, and her specialty is support. Sasha announces the start of the operation, and they go into the cave. The Cobra Queen sees them immediately and screams. Sasha picks up her sword and tells it no hard feelings, but it dies here, and Hayes watches with genuine admiration because no matter how many times he sees this, it is a wonderful sight. Her blessing is Swordmaster. It lets her use swords exclusively, and as long as she is holding one, she gets stronger and gains swordsmanship nobody else has. The best part of it is that she can release magical power at will and pour it into her sword and her shield. It is one of the 16 master blessings currently known. A snake comes up behind Robin, and Reynold catches it and uses shield break to knock the thing away. Piazzolla laughs and points out that their shield master, who is supposed to be their shield, just let an enemy get that close. Then Hayes comes into the cave and starts to say something, and the team notices, and Reynold calls out to him, alarmed, because a snake is attacking him from behind. Sasha sees it and kills the monster with one strike from across the cave. He is thoroughly rattled by that and apologizes and says he is grateful she saved him. He starts to say something else, and she says unhappily and at volume that he should stop causing trouble and stand still, then turns away from him and leaves. Reynold calls the others and reports human bones in here. Tycoon says they need to bring as many as possible back to the guild. Robin asks what to do with the other materials, and the leader says leave it, because all they need is the core of the queen cobra, and that alone proves the kill. Hayes is also going through the cave, and among the bones he finds a book and asks what it is. Sasha turns around and tells him, unhappily and at volume, to stop dithering and start getting ready. He puts the book in his bag, agrees and says it was his oversight. Back in the city he opens it, finds an image of a weapon, and asks what this chapter and this picture are. There is a sense of mystery to it that reminds him of the day he received his blessing. He supposes he will decipher it gradually, and who knows, maybe this is the catalyst he needs to finally use the thing. Then the whole team walks into the room, and Sasha says his name with a very serious face. He turns around and says hello, and she tells him to listen because she has been thinking about something. He should leave the team. He is confused enough to ask about their promise, and whether she has genuinely forgotten it. She says sadly that she has not forgotten. However, the team is being promoted to a rank very soon, and when that happens, in general terms, he is only dragging the rest of them down. She plans to take the team higher than that. Then she puts a bag of money on the table and tells him to take it for the trip home. He grinds his teeth, and Reynold comes over and apologizes for this, and pats his shoulder and says they will do everything possible to spread their name far enough that it reaches his hometown. Hayes asks whether there is genuinely no place for him on this team. Reynold agrees in a serious tone, so Hayes asks whether it seems like he cannot wait for him to leave, which throws the man slightly, and he looks at Sasha and starts to say something. Robin raises her hand and says loudly that she knew it, and that he really is against him leaving, and that his blessing is also a master, is it not? They may not know what he is a master of, but someday, she does not get to finish, because Reynold asks seriously when exactly that day arrives, because their battles are going to be harder than they have ever been from now on. Robin is startled by that and asks what is wrong with him, because this is not what he usually says. He cuts across her and says loudly that Hayes cannot be here anymore, because the team no longer needs him, and that he is officially throwing him out. Hayes does not argue. He picks the book up off the table and says he heard them. Tycoon says his name and asks him to take their parting gift. He stops at the door and says he does not need it. Tycoon starts to say something, and Hayes knocks the bag of money out of his hands with a swing of his arm and says loudly that he said he does not need it. He agreed to leave the team. He was never going to give up, and he is not becoming an adventurer like Sasha, who throws away the weak in order to climb. He slams the door and says out loud that he will never give up. She starts picking money up off the floor, and Reynold says her name. She says she is sorry for making them do something like that. He starts helping her collect it and tells her not to worry about it, and then asks whether she is sure she wants it this way. She smiles and says it is okay. She did not want him to die, so it is okay, even if he hates her for it. 2 months later, Hayes is walking through the city, having killed 20 goblins today, which is his best so far, and knowing he still needs to get stronger. Adventurers notice him and start talking. That is the guy who used to be in the Saints. He got thrown out, right? Now he is an herb gatherer, and still an adventurer, and a solo one at that. He is the disgrace of Team Saints. Maybe their leader does not need him anymore. He walks into the guild and runs directly into Sasha coming out. She says his name surprised. He walks straight past without a word, and then stops because she asks him to listen, and says that south of here, toward the desert country of Desara, in the swamplands, it seems white clover is blooming, which is used to make healing potions. Then she leaves, and he stands there thinking about white clover growing in a swamp somewhere. White clover flowers are quite expensive. He could sell that for real money, and he wonders surprised whether she and the others are actually still looking out for him. He believes in her kindness. It is quite far, so he decides to go tomorrow. The next day he reaches the swamp and says out loud how beautiful it is. He starts picking, and thinks that they may not be on the same team anymore, but he should at least find a way to express his gratitude. And maybe someday that dream still comes true. Then it gets dark, suddenly, and he turns around. And there is an enormous dragon over his head. It roars loud enough to put him on the ground, and he decides he needs to get out of here. The dragon takes him with a claw and opens his face. He screams. It hits him again and puts him into the rock behind him. He starts coughing blood and asks himself whether this is that dragon's habitat, and why Sasha told him about this place. He remembers the adventurers in the street calling him the shame of the saints, and asks with the last of it whether he was simply an obstacle to her. Then he looks up at the thing standing over him and says over and over that he does not want to die. His hand touches the book he found, and the book starts to shine. A grenade launcher appears in his hand, and he says he can feel it. He has never seen a weapon like this in his life, and he knows exactly how to use it. Pull the trigger, and it launches the explosive. The dragon comes at him roaring. He points the thing at it and says he can kill it, then puts the round straight into the monster's mouth and kills it with one shot. He sits there stunned and says it out loud. Being a weapon master is his blessing. He looks at the book and says this weapon is not from this world. The gun disappears out of his hands, and he starts laughing. She betrayed him. He is never going to forget it. Sometime later, Geist has Reynold, Piazzolla, and the rest in his office, and congratulates them on reaching a rank. They thank him. And then he remembers Hayes and asks incidentally how he is doing. Sasha is surprised and asks why he is asking. He says there have been some bad rumors about the boy lately, and he explains that most people mock him for refusing to stop being an adventurer. And on top of that, there are rumors that they have been trying to harm him. That lands badly on the room, and she asks whether he genuinely thinks they would harm him. Geist drinks his tea, perfectly calm, and says these are of course only rumors. The more famous they get, the more attention lands on a former member. However, he knows they are not the kind of people who would do that to him. Then he says her name, and says the boy told him he is still going to fulfill his childhood dream, and that he is saving money to do it. And Sasha says calmly that she told him about a great place for picking herbs. That gets Geist's attention, and he asks where that place is. She says it is on the way to the desert country of Desara, in the swamplands. He slams his palm on the table and asks whether she is serious right now. She agrees, confused, and he grabs his own head and says this is bad, because that place is the lair of an SS plus rank monster, an ancient black dragon. She goes very pale, and a guild worker runs into the office shouting that they have an emergency and asking him to come downstairs immediately. He agrees and tells them to come with him. They run down to the guild hall, and what they find is Hayes, who has brought the dragon's head. They say his name in shock. He says Sasha's name unhappily and asks whether she hated him that much. Unfortunately for them, it did not go according to plan, because he survived and killed it. She asks bewildered what he is talking about, and he says loudly that she should stop pretending to be stupid. For a moment he was glad, thinking they were supporting him. He has had enough. He is not trusting people anymore. He will get stronger on his own. Then he says her name and starts to say something else, and does not finish because he loses consciousness. She calls his name. 2 years later, Hayes has S rank and the nickname Harbinger of Darkness, and he walks into an inn, puts a few coins on the counter, and says he is staying for the next month with breakfast included. The owner, reading a newspaper, looks up and asks whether he is in S rank, and whether a luxury inn would not suit him better than this dump. He asks whether anybody would expect somebody of that rank to be here, which is exactly why he chose it. Then his attention catches on the newspaper, which says the Silver Valkyrie has finally reached S rank, and that her team is now being buried in membership applications. He reads that, and goes up to his room. Later, at the Adventurers Guild, he walks into the office and asks what Geist wants. Geist sighs and says he heard the boy defeated a mithril ogre, which is S plus rank. Hayes agrees calmly that he did, and that he also did it alone. Geist smiles and says he trained him well. Hayes asks loudly when the man ever taught him anything like that, which is a fair question and worth a note on how any of this is measured. Monster ranks reflect strength, running from the lowest F to the highest SSS. Although there has never been an SSS ranked monster, the highest that has ever existed is SS. Geist remembers the state the bodies arrived in and says he could get excellent items out of these if he killed them more carefully. Hayes says that with his blessing, that is impossible. Then Geist produces a letter and says it is for him. It is an invitation to the ceremony assigning S rank to an adventurer. Hayes asks whether they did not already do this. Geist says that was the ceremony at the guild. This is an invitation from the royal family. Hayes asks why on earth the royal family holds ceremonies for S-rank adventurers, and Geist explains that the first king is the man who started this entire adventurer business, and that he became the first holder of S-rank himself, which surprises Hayes slightly because the first king was an adventurer. That is why the royal family is responsible for rewarding S-rank adventurers who follow the first king's path. And at that ceremony, he is awarded S-rank, only after which he is officially recognized as an S-rank adventurer. Hayes asks whether he gets awarded S-rank after already running S-rank plus missions. Geist picks up his teacup and says he remembered something. Sasha is also going to be there. Hayes goes tense, and Geist asks whether he thinks he still cannot forgive her. He says seriously that he can never forgive her, and Geist says calmly that as he has told him countless times, she threw him out because she did not want him to get hurt. She cared about him. Hayes asks whether a person doing it out of kindness tells him to stop standing in her way, and that he is dragging the team down. She would not have said those words, would she? Geist drinks his tea and says he is certain that is not what she really meant. Hayes says that even if that is true, it does not change the fact that she threw him out. Geist starts to say something, and stops and cannot bring himself to, then collects himself and says he definitely never said anything in favor of casting aside the weak, and that he is certain that is how they became the strongest team. Hayes puts the letter in his pocket, says his name, and says he is continuing his journey alone. He does not trust anybody, least of all so-called teammates. He does not need them. Then he leaves, and Geist sits in his office and sighs and says that even with power like that, he is still a child. A few months later, Hayes and Sasha are standing in the palace hall while the 13th king of the kingdom of Haybelk, Barbaros, reads their names and ranks. They agree with his highness. He says they are missing their official invitations from the kingdom of Haybelk and calls his children forward. Prince Cress addresses Sasha and gives her the job of defeating the crystal golems that have suddenly appeared in the crystal mines south of the kingdom, and says he will be accompanying them on that mission. She accepts it happily and humbly. Then Princess Muon comes over to Hayes, extremely pleased with herself, and announces she is reading his task aloud. On the sacred mountain of Gagazia, in the forest kingdom of Igdora, east of the kingdom of Haybelk. His task is to collect the eternal moongrass, which is used to make elixirs. She accepts this task. It will be her first adventure. She is already vibrating with anticipation, and Hayes says he agrees to carry out the task. However, he cannot allow her highness to accompany him. The entire hall stops. Geist grabs his own head. She asks, frustrated, why he is refusing. He says a great many dangerous monsters live on Gagazia, and that according to his calculations, if he is also protecting her highness, the success rate of this request drops to 80%, not to mention that her highness's life would be in danger. Somebody asks, startled, whether that calculation includes his entire team, and to the surprise of everybody in the room, he says he works alone. Then he addresses his majesty directly and says he cannot allow her highness to accompany him on this mission and asks to be allowed to go alone. The king's advisor looks at Barbaros with genuine alarm, and Barbaros starts laughing, then looks at the boy calmly and says this is the royal family's way of witnessing the emergence of a new S-rank adventurer. And to think that a member of the royal family cannot go. That is definitely a first. He has heard about this one's achievements, how he completes S-rank missions, and the fact that he completes them himself. Fine, he will make an exception. Muon turns to her father confused and says that however, this is her first adventure. He cuts across her, says her name, and tells her to stop thinking about accompanying him. She does not argue. He claps his hands and says the official part of the ceremony is over, and asks everybody to proceed to the exit because there's a dinner party. At the party, with the maids bringing out an enormous spread, the king comes over to Geist, laughs, and asks whether that boy is not unusual. Geist says uneasily that he definitely is. He had a premonition. He genuinely did not think the boy would come out and say it here. The advisor smiles and says he has no idea what would have happened if Geist had not warned them in advance, which makes Geist nervous, and he says they are truly sorry about what happened to her highness. Barbaros looks away and says everything is fine and nobody needs to worry, because as they can all see, that impudent young lady is already on her way over to Sasha. She has not yet been refused by an S-rank adventurer. Muon arrives in front of the saints with a very determined face and announces that she is asking to be allowed to come with them. Cress comes up behind her, says her name and tells her not to be this selfish. She turns on her dear brother and points out that this was supposed to be her first adventure. He says worried that she is currently disturbing the saints. And Sasha says that is not the case at all, and that if her highness wishes to do this, she does not mind in the slightest. Muon is delighted and thanks her. Meanwhile, Hayes is standing alone on a balcony looking down into the hall and wondering what exactly is wrong with this princess. Then he looks at his old team and remembers the time he spent with them and looks at the floor. Geist comes up and suggests a drink, hands him a glass and tells him he has no idea how nervous he was earlier, because he did not expect him to say something like that to a king. Hayes smiles slightly and points out that normally people do not laugh at something like that. Geist laughs, apologizes, and says the king found that side of him quite funny. Hayes agrees, and Geist pats him on the head and says that however he should not be filling his head with any of this, and that in any case, since he walks alone, nobody can cover his back. He should remember that. Hayes removes the hand unhappily, and Geist asks what he plans to do. He closes his fist and says he plans to keep taking requests and practicing his skills, besides which he still has not deciphered most of that ancient book. However, right now he is going home. He drinks the glass and leaves the castle, and on the way out, somebody asks him to wait and says his name. He stops and turns around, and it is Sasha who ran after him. She says she wants to talk to him again, just the two of them. He says unhappily that he has nothing to talk to her about. He turns to go, and she says she wants to apologize. He laughs, covers his face with his hand, and tells her to stop making fun of him already. She is completely thrown by that, and he turns around and asks angrily and at volume why she decided to apologize now. She had a great many opportunities over the past 2 years. Not even on the day he was nearly killed. It starts to rain. She says his name confused, and he does not listen, and says that the very next day after he lost consciousness, all of them went off on a mission. She was never planning to apologize. She starts to say something, and he cuts across her and says he does not need her apology. Whatever she says means nothing to him. She says his name. He does not want to hear it, and starts walking, so she runs after him, grabs his sleeve, apologizes and says she was scared. She thought banishing him was for his own good. She thought that if she could make their dream come true, he would surely understand. And he asks her coldly what the point of calling it their dream was if she is the only one living it. Their dream was more like her dream. He pulls out of her grip, which is not strong, and tells her not to use him as an excuse. She starts crying, and he stands with his back to her and says that his dream now is to become the strongest. He will never cast aside the weak the way she did, and if that means severing ties with people, then he is better off alone from the start. Whatever her reason for leaving him behind, she also destroyed the dream they shared. He puts his hood up and tells her not to forget that her goal is to become the best team, so she should work toward it. Even if he is not around, then he leaves, and decides they are never getting back to what they were. Sometime later, he is running the file on eternal moongrass, one of the rare ingredients used in elixirs, whose main feature is that it glows. They say it grows only at the peak of the sacred mountain Gagasia, in the forest country of Igdora. He wakes up in his room, where all his extremely high-ranking equipment is lying around, gets ready, and goes to the Adventurers Guild. He hands his card to the worker, who smiles and tells him the guild leader is currently talking to Sasha. He walks to the quest board, perfectly calm, and says it is fine. She apologizes and asks him to wait a minute. He looks at the board and wonders whether there are any high-ranking quests on it. The highest is a B-rank extermination, and he cannot complete that one on the way. Then his attention catches on an elf girl walking into the guild. She notices him looking and asks whether something is wrong. He looks away and says nothing. She does not appear to care in the slightest, and says fine, then turns back to him and asks whether elves are really that rare. He says perhaps they are, since elves rarely leave the forest country of Igdora, so it is safe to assume she does not come here often. She says he guessed correctly, and that today is indeed her first time here. She has been traveling west, and ended up in this central region. Then she remembers something, takes out a card and mentions she is an adventurer. He looks at it and asks whether that means she is B rank, and where her party is. She puts the card away and says she does not have one, because she is strong enough to handle it on her own, which is the first time in his life Hayes has heard another person say the exact sentence he says. She asks what about him. He shows his card and she says he is an S rank, and that it is quite rare to meet an S rank solo. He agrees, and says he hears that a lot. She asks whether he is on a quest right now. He agrees and says it is in the forest country of Igdora, which gets her attention very fast, and she asks loudly whether he is really going there. He is thrown by that, confirms it, apologizes, and asks whether she could simply pretend she did not hear anything. Also, could she move away a bit? She agrees and tells him he should not talk that carelessly about quests like that. Then a guild worker calls him over, because the guild leader is free. He says goodbye to the elf and goes to the office. And Sasha, coming out into the hall, notices him and asks whether he also came to ask Geist about the royal quest. She starts to say something else. He walks straight past her without acknowledging that she exists. In the office, Geist sits down opposite him and says that apparently an SS plus rank dragon lives at the peak of Mount Gagazia. Even Yggdrasil, one of the 4 great clans, avoids going near it, which is worth unpacking, because the Yggdrasil clan is made up mainly of demi-humans, and its leader is the elven hero Ibis, and clans themselves are organizations only S-rank adventurers are allowed to create. They lead several teams of adventurers at once. They also let adventurers take quests directly, bypassing the guild entirely, and collect the rewards directly. Geist hands him a letter and tells him to take it. He accepts it, and Geist says it is a letter of recommendation, and that he should give it to the leader of the Yggdrasil clan. He is certain it will be of enormous help. Hayes asks whether he knows the masters of the 4 great clans, and Geist says that when you have been an adventurer for over 40 years, you inevitably make connections one way or another. He puts the letter into the storage inside his ring, and says he is leaving. Geist says his name and asks him to be careful out there. Later, some distance outside the royal capital, Hayes takes out his pistol, turns sharply and asks who is there. Nobody answers. So he fires into the ground, raises the pistol higher, and says that next time he does not miss. And Prezia drops the magic hiding her and says fine. She gives up, because he appears to have noticed her. He asks why she is following him. She says calmly that she has a request. He tells her to go pester somebody else. She refuses, and says it has to be him, because she also wants to go to the sacred mountain of Gagazia. She is asking to be allowed to travel with him until they get there. He asks what the reason is. The eternal moongrass. It is the only thing that can save her sister. She has every other ingredient she needs. However, it is currently mating season for the monsters up there, which makes getting permission to enter impossible. He asks what any of that has to do with him. She says that if it is him, that is a different matter entirely, because the forest kingdom of Igdora is under the protection of the kingdom of Haybelk. So if he holds a quest from that kingdom, he will absolutely be allowed in. He asks how she knows that much about his quest. She says she had a premonition, so she eavesdropped on his conversation with the guild master. She needs to save her sister. That is why she needs to go to Gagazia with him, at least until they enter the sacred mountain. She is asking to be his partner until then, and if she dies along the way, he can simply leave the body there. However, if she gets the eternal moon herb, she gives him all her money. So is he okay with that? He says that whatever her reason is, it has nothing to do with him. Then he puts the weapon away and says he does not particularly care if she wants to come along. However, one thing gets clarified immediately. They are not partners. So if it gets dangerous, she is on her own. Prezia says that is fine, because she can defend herself. He makes an irritated noise, turns around, and walks off toward his mission. She introduces herself with a small smile and tells him that is her name, and that his name is Hayes, right? Nice to meet him. He says nothing at all, looking mildly displeased, and keeps walking. Later on the way up the mountain, they run into a group of goblins, which he removes with his gun. She looks at that and says his weapon is definitely something special, and asks whether that is his blessing. He agrees, and she says her blessing is called Spirit Command, which lets her control spirits that ordinary people cannot see. She can ask them for help, for eavesdropping, for example, or for hiding her. He says that explains how she knew he was heading to Gagazia. She agrees, and asks about his blessing, which surprises him enough that he sighs before answering. His blessing is called Weapon Master, and it lets him perfectly use weapons from another world. She asks what he means by another world. He says he does not fully understand it himself. So far, he can use 4 different types of weapon. There are more, and he does not know how to use them yet. Then he hands her the gun. It disappears the moment she touches it. And he adds that besides all of that, he is the only person who can use them. Then he starts pulling things out of the ring and says enough talking. It is time to set up camp. Prezia says item storages really are amazing, and that to think he has that much in there. He says he bought the one with the largest capacity back in the capital. She says how envious, although that is to be expected from an S rank. Then she watches him cook and asks what he is making. He hands her a tray of food and tells her to take it. She asks, confused whether he is absolutely sure, since they are not even partners. He says calmly to just try it. She takes a spoonful of the soup and says it is amazing, and that he is quite good at this. He says he used to do all the cooking and the housework. Later she finishes and thanks him for the food. He agrees calmly, then notices her looking at him and asks whether something is wrong. She says she simply thought he was a colder person than this. He asks whether she wants to start a fight. She says she is genuinely very grateful to him, because she is following him, and because of that, she has a chance to save her sister. She will ask the spirits to watch the camp tonight as thanks for the food. He should rest. And Hayes notes privately that things like this are nostalgic. They travel on, come out of the forest, and he stops and asks what that is. Prezia says that is the Yggdrasil clan's base, a great tree that serves as the symbol of their clan, and says with genuine awe that this is one of the 4 sages who led the great clans, and that the master of the clan, Ibis, used her powers to create that tree, which raises the obvious question of what the 4 great clans actually are. 4 organizations, each of which rivals an entire country in size. The Western clan is the world's largest entertainment district, a fantasy. The Southern clan is an enormous mining structure run by the Cavern King dwarves. The Northern clan, the Holy Knights of Seifert, only accepts people whose blessings are linked to the sword. And where they are standing right now is the Yggdrasil clan. Those are the 4 great clans. They reach the main gate of the forest country of Idora, where a guard asks for documents, and Hayes shows his, and says he came on behalf of the royal family and needs access to Gagazia. The guard reads it, surprised, and confirms it really is a commission from the royal family. Then he remembers something, turns and says, right, this one too. At which point Hayes notices that his traveling companion has covered herself entirely in cloth, and quietly asks what she is doing. She asks him to simply ignore it. The guard hands him a small sign, and says that is his entry permit. And Hayes remembers Geist's letter and mentions he definitely has this as well. A letter from a guild master he knows. The guard asks to check that first, opens it, reads it, and is extremely surprised by what he is looking at, then runs off asking him to wait a little. Later he comes back with an old man Hayes has never seen, who walks up and says he must be Geist's apprentice and apologizes for the wait. Hayes says calmly that it is nothing to worry about. The old man takes his hand, starts pulling him along, and says he needs to come because the master is calling for him. He starts to object, decides against it, and wonders how everything turned into this much hassle after he simply handed somebody a letter. Prezia says she will wait for him here. He turns and starts to say something, and she says Ibis holds more power than the royal family of Egdora, so he should try not to offend her. The old man leads him to a tree and says this is called an elevator. They ride it up, and he points and says over there is where he will find the master of the Yggdrasil clan. This is the Ibis shrine. They go inside, and the master of the Yggdrasil clan greets him as Geist's apprentice and welcomes him, which confuses him because she is still a child. And he asks whether she is Miss Ibis. She agrees and says she read the guild master's letter. It says he wanted her to help him. It also says he will most likely refuse her help. He sighs unhappily, and she starts laughing, calls him an insolent youth, and says the letter apparently hit the nail directly on the head. Then she calms down and says there's something strangely nostalgic about him. She comes closer and says she can smell gunpowder on him, which surprises him, and he asks whether she knows about firearms. She smiles and says she once had a partner who used them, so he takes out the book and asks whether she knows anything about this. She's genuinely startled, picks it up and says smiling, to think this still exists. He says that means she knows about it. She agrees and says this book belonged to Nobunaga. It is his diary. Hayes repeats the name back at her, and she says he heard correctly. A person from another world who somehow ended up in this one. He asks whether she knows what is written in it. Then, she closes the book, denies it with a smile, and says she has no idea because she cannot read the letters of the other world. He also never told her what was in it. Besides which, she did not know much about his shooting abilities either. Incidentally, can he read the text in this book? He agrees and says although he only understands a little. Then he opens it, asks her to wait in a rather surprised tone, and asks whether he can now read more pages than before, which gets her attention, and she says this is already interesting, and asks him to tell her what it says. He agrees, starts reading, gives her the date, and reads it out. Ibis looked in on him again today, just like a cat. She was the cutest thing in the world. He needs to pay more attention to her this evening too. He wonders if he gave her cat ears and a tail would she wear them. Just imagining it is already cute. Maybe he should hunt some cat-like monsters to make it happen. Now he is really charged up. That is what it says. She is mortified. And he asks whether she and this Nobunaga were lovers or something along those lines. She throws a pillow at him and announces at volume that that is enough for today. If he needs help, he can come another time. Then she says goodbye. Hayes gets out of the building and remarks on what a convenient coincidence it is that he can suddenly read more pages. It almost seems like the book has a will of its own. He reaches the elevator and asks himself whether that can possibly be right. Sometime later, near the peak of the sacred mountain Gagazia, He says they have almost reached the top. Prezi says the fog is clearly getting thicker the higher they climb, and that she can hardly see anything, which is when an enormous snake comes growling out of the ground behind her. She spins around and screams. He turns, clicks his tongue in irritation, pulls a gun, and puts several rounds into the thing. It dies. She looks at the corpse, thoroughly rattled, and he says calmly that this is a monster which hunts using fog to its advantage. She should be on her guard. She asks why he helped her, given that they are not partners, and he asks whether she did not say she wanted to save her sister. He is not obliged to save her. He also has no reason not to help her save her sister. That is all. She can consider it gratitude for everything she has taught him on the way up. Her face goes slightly red and she thanks him. They keep climbing, and then they hear a long howl. They look up and he says calmly that it is a dragon. She says seriously that it has presumably gone hunting, which makes now the best possible time to pick up the eternal moon herb. Then she runs. He shouts after her, and she turns and says she will be back the moment she has it, and that she will give him the reward when she returns. He tells her to wait. She does not listen, so he calls her an idiot and lays out exactly why. She is underestimating the dragon because dragons are extremely jealous of their territory, and they come straight back the instant somebody sets foot in it. At which point a great many enormous worms crawl out of the ground around him, and he says unhappily, now this as well. Meanwhile, she reaches the clearing and says she finally made it. Then looks around and says there really is nothing here, and that she needs to find the eternal moongrass quickly while there is still time. She runs deeper in, and stops, because the eternal moongrass is gone. There is nothing left. She goes down onto her knees and says that then she cannot prepare the elixir, and apologizes to her sister, which is when an enormous green elephant dragon, a monster of SS plus rank, comes at her roaring. She turns around in horror at the sound, then gets hold of herself very fast, sets up a shot with her bow, and decides that if she wounds it badly enough to distract it, she may be able to escape. She fires and hits it in the head. Nothing happens. She decides this cannot be true, because spiritual energy has no effect on this thing, so she will simply have to try something more powerful. She does not get the chance, because the monster lets out a scream loud enough that she has to cover her ears. And while she is disoriented, the dragon puts out its long tongue and takes her. She cannot get out of the grip, and it starts pulling her toward its mouth. And at the last possible moment, Hayes arrives and shoots the dragon's tongue off. The monster screams, she falls, he catches her, calls her an idiot, and asks what exactly she thought she was doing. She says his name, startled, and asks what he is doing here. He puts her aside and tells her to get back, then takes out his weapon and puts round after round into the dragon's head. He notices that is not going to be a fatal blow, so he takes out his rifle instead, points it at the thing, and fires several shots into the same place. The dragon goes down. He exhales and asks whether it is dead. She cannot believe what she just watched and says defeating a dragon was that easy. He asks whether she is alright. She agrees, confused, thinks about it, and then asks why he came at all, since she asked him to wait. Then goes red and privately asks herself whether he ran up here to save her. He says that in any case they should move, because it is already starting to stink. She agrees, sighs. He asks what is wrong, and she looks at the clearing and says it is glowing, so it does not glow during the day. They walk over and look at the eternal moongrass, and it starts withering in front of them, and he asks whether it is withering because of the dragon's blood. She says this cannot be happening, right after they finally found it. He looks around, points, and tells her to look over there, because there is one last moongrass. The blood did not reach. She runs to it, takes out a jar and a shovel, transplants it fast, and then holds the thing against herself. Then she walks over to him, hands him the jar, and says he is the one who defeated the dragon. Therefore the grass belongs to him. As for the eternal moon herb, perhaps she will find more if she looks elsewhere. He looks at the jar and says nothing, and she says the task is completed. Some time later, on the way down the mountain path, a group of several people spot them and call out to her, loudly and extremely politely, which surprises her, and Hayes notices the way they address her. An elf named Adra walks up and says he is glad he finally found her. She decided to leave a note like that and simply disappear. Then he looks at Hayes and asks whether he must be an S-rank adventurer, and whether he is the one who brought her to Gagazia. He confirms it, and Adra informs him that she is the younger sister of Alcera, the Queen of Igdora. He most likely did not know that, and she cannot be taken lightly. Then he asks her how everything went. She says nothing, and she does not have to because he understands and says it is exactly as he thought. So, since she could not collect anything after a trip all the way up the sacred mountain of Gagazia, it is time for her to stop. She asks indignantly and at volume whether he wants her to leave her sister to die. He says he did not say that. It is simply her sister's fate. Such is destiny. Now she returns home immediately, because they also need to discuss their marriage. She does not dare argue. And Hayes quietly puts the jar of herbs into her bag, and says it looks like it is time for her to go. Then says goodbye and walks off along the forest path without another word. Sometime later in the forested land of Igdora, in the queen's chambers, Presius says her sister's name, starts crying, apologizes, and says she could not find the eternal moongrass. Alcera reaches for her face and says everything is fine, and that it is simply fate. Then says her name and asks whether she could tell her about all her travels through the western and central lands, which she remembers, and she smiles and says of course because she brought her souvenirs. She starts looking through her bag, and finds the eternal moon herb in it. She takes it out, staring, and remembers exactly who is standing next to that bag. A few days later, Hayes is in the office reporting what happened and Geist says he cannot believe it, so he failed the task. Although the task itself is only a formality from the royal family, it would still have been better if he had succeeded, especially considering how hard he fought to keep the princess out of it. So what does he plan to do now? He says, calmly, the same old thing. Take tasks. Clear dungeons. Geist takes out a scroll and says he had a premonition he would say exactly that, so he has a task perfectly suited to him. Hayes asks what kind. A dungeon has recently been discovered, and the task is to explore it. He says goodbye, leaves the office, and is genuinely surprised when somebody says his name. He turns around and asks Prisea why she is here. She smiles, remembering, and says she was able to cure her sister's illness with the elixir, which was only possible because of the eternal moon herb he gave her. Alcera has already recovered enough to return to her royal duties. She owes him a debt she cannot pay. Hayes asks what she wants now. She says that as a reward for her exploits, she was given the freedom to keep traveling as she wishes. She also managed to break off her engagement with Adra, so she would like to repay him somehow. They will not be comrades or partners or anything else. She would simply be glad to be his conversational partner. For as long as he wants, of course. What does he say to that? He starts walking away, refuses, and says he is categorically against this idea. She smiles, follows him, and asks whether he could at least eat with her, because there's a nice cafe nearby and she will treat him. A few days earlier, Sasha and her team and 2 members of the royal family reached the crystal mine, and she said that now everybody is here. They are ready to take on the royal quest. They go and get that crystal golem, and they run the plan again. They need to increase the power of their attacks enough to pierce the golem's extremely durable body. They start with Cress's double ability, which creates a copy of her. Then Muon enhances the arrows with an explosion, and Robin fires them. Once those land on the golem, Sasha strikes. She is counting on them to cover her. Her team listens with completely calm faces. She asks the prince and princess whether they are both ready. They agree, and she says they begin. Inside, they look around and somebody asks whether it is not beautiful in here. Mining here is permitted only for producing offerings to other nations. The mine is packed with extremely high-quality ore. Anybody who dares mine here without special permission is executed without further questions. There is a genuinely strange glow in the place. Tycoon adjusts his glasses and mentions that, incidentally, he has heard the ore deeper down is far more beautiful and far purer, which catches Sasha's attention, and she turns and asks whether that is true. Then Robin sees something and tells everybody to stop, because there are crystal golems. 7 of them, and something is wrong. Reinhold asks what she means by wrong. She says to look over there. 5 of them appear to be patrolling the mine, while 2 stand guard in the processing area at the back. Their movements look strangely coordinated. Tycoon says that is definitely strange, because golems are supposed to be fairly simple creatures mutated out of ore or rock and turned into monsters. They should not have that level of consciousness. He asks the team leader what they do. Sasha takes her sword and says they obviously stick to the plan. Cress immediately points at her and creates an exact copy of her. Robin holds out several arrows and says she is counting on her. Muon puts explosion on them. She takes aim and says they are doing this. She fires and the arrows land on the monsters, and Sasha and her clone come off the ledge together. She uses Silver Flash, Lotus Strike, releasing a wave of energy that destroys the 2 nearest golems. Then both of them run forward and finish the rest. She turns to her team and says it is over. A doppelganger is truly an amazing ability. Everybody praises it, and Cress thanks them for the compliment. Although once he has copied somebody, he cannot do it again with the same target for at least a day. Then Sasha looks toward the passage nearby and says that, however, she senses an ominous aura coming from there, so she hopes he can use it again. Reinhold asks whether she is serious. She agrees and says she does not believe that is another crystal golem, but she is sure of one thing. It knows they are here. It is not part of the mission, and they cannot simply ignore it. Everybody pays attention. They are going in. They walk down a dark corridor into the crystal processing area, and meet a demon who asks whether she sensed him and decided to come closer. She is quite talented, isn't she? She asks seriously who he is. He smirks and says he is Crane. A demon? Tycoon reacts badly enough that he asks whether the man just called himself a demon, which gets Sasha's attention and he explains it seriously. This is the race that waged a great war against them, humans, back when the survival of the species was at stake. That war ended when a certain man used his power to split the world in 2. One continent is the one they live on, the human world. The other is the demon world, where the demons live. Nobody is supposed to be able to travel between them. So how did he end up here? The demon says he is quite knowledgeable, in which case he should also know what demons are capable of. Tycoon says her name and says, worried, that they need to get out of here, because in the Great Demon War there were only a few thousand of them, and they fought tens of thousands of humans. That is how insanely strong every single one of them is. Crane says, delighted that he is pleased to receive compliments like that. Fine. He will let them go today, and they can thank the man in glasses over there. He has already received the high-purity crystals he came for. She asks seriously what he intends to do with those crystals. He says calmly that she would not understand even if he told her. So they should stay out of his way if they do not want to be crushed and leave, which is the wrong thing to say to her, and she asks whether he thinks he can crush them. He smirks and says humans are simply insects who cannot resist the temptation of treasure. So she swings her sword and cuts the crystal out of his hand. That makes him angry, and he asks seriously what she thinks she is doing. She points the sword at him and says she understands everything now. An insect has broken into the kingdom of Haybelk, and she is simply exterminating it. He looks at her with real anger, and Tycoon says her name, worried. And Reynold walks up with a confident smile and asks whether he has forgotten already. Mining without a license is grounds for execution. Robin takes out arrows, hands them to Muan, and asks her to do it again. Piazzolla is furious and demands to know how he dares talk to their leader like that. Then she sighs slightly, raises her staff over her head, and boosts every one of her comrades with magic. Crane watches that and says, smiling, that she has such an interesting ability. Sasha runs at him. He snaps his fingers, throws her into a wall, and says that, however, this is nothing compared to a demon's skills. Piazzolla is alarmed, puts out a hand, says her name, and heals her with magic, and she gets back up out of it. He appears behind her incredibly fast and says this is so annoying, and that he will deal with her first. He goes for her eye with his hand, and Reynold gets a shield in front of it and says loudly, as if he would allow that. So Crane switches to wind magic and says, smirking, that it is exactly like that. This is his skill, or whatever they call it. He controls the wind freely. He builds a heavy stream of it around himself and lifts a great many objects into the air. Then asks angrily whether they understand now. If he wanted, he could wipe out an entire city with a single storm. Their powers are on a completely different level from pathetic humans. Sasha steps forward and says it is definitely an amazing ability, although it still will not be enough to beat them. Because in a battle, strength is not everything, and she is asking to prove that to him. He chuckles and asks what she could even do, and an arrow flies into his back and explodes. He is genuinely surprised and asks how that happened. Could that girl have thrown the arrows onto the objects he lifted? So he snaps his fingers and says he is asking to be allowed to return her attack, and launches every box and every arrow she planted back at them on the wind. At which point Cress creates a copy of Reynold, and both of them put shields up and cover the entire team. Crane is not expecting that, and Sasha jumps at him and says that even if her strength alone is not enough to compete with him, she puts a heavy sword strike into him. Together with teamwork, they can beat him. Crane screams, and she says seriously that this moment right here is the proof of it. He throws up a barrier of wind and demands to know how she dares. A pathetic human made him look like an idiot. All her friends and everybody precious to her, along with the entire country. He is going to destroy all of it, and after that, he personally kills her. She should remember his words. Then he teleports somewhere unknown, and she stands there looking at the spot where he was. In the royal castle of the kingdom of Haybelk, the king listens to their report, and Sasha says the demon called himself Crane and was clearly plotting something. Barbaros says, calmly, that he understands her, and calls his children by name, and says he would like to hear their opinions. He listens to them, and then says Team Saints did an excellent job on the task. She thanks him for the kind words, and he says that while Hayes failed his task, they, on the contrary, completed theirs flawlessly, which surprises her because he failed his task. He asks whether they seem to deserve a proper reward, and what they would like. She says that if possible, they would like to ask for a house for their clan. A servant comes in wheeling a cart of scrolls, and the king says that is very good. He had a premonition they would ask for that, so he told the minister to look into everything in advance. Now they can choose any house they like. Sasha goes over to Minister Bonnet and says she is very grateful to him. He says he does not need thanks. Also about the other one's failure. She might be curious. She says nothing about it, which he understands perfectly, and he tells her anyway. According to the report they received from Igdora, he did manage to obtain one eternal moon herb. However, on learning that Queen Alcera was ill, he gave that herb to her younger sister. Prezia, he hears, delivered it to her. Sasha says his name, and the minister says that although he failed the mission, in exchange he received the gratitude of the royal family of Igdora for saving one of its members. Her Majesty wanted to reward him for it. He refused. Robin arrives at her shoulder, delighted, and says he is still the same person they knew, still exactly as selfless. Sasha clears her throat and asks what Lady Prezé has been up to lately. The minister says she has presumably left Igdora and continued along her adventurer's path, and if he heard correctly, she is traveling with him. Both of them react to that, and Sasha, looking slightly displeased, asks whether they are implying that he is planning to team up with her. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, Hayes is sitting in the office asking with a very surprised expression whether he was just told to rest. Geist agrees and says the quest to explore the highest level dungeon is complete. He asks, surprised, whether they are not only on the 60th floor. A guild worker comes in with his new card, and Geist says there is a reason for that. They announce that floors 60 and above remain unexplored, and he has called for other adventurers to respond. Hayes asks, worried, what about the other dungeons? Geist says there are not any, just like there are no high-level quests. He really should take a break occasionally. A break is just as important. He is only 16. There is nothing wrong with enjoying being young. He has an idea. How about going on a date at least once? Hayes drinks his tea and says he is not interested, and also has nobody to ask. And Geist asks whether he does not have Prezia. He looks up, thrown, and says confusedly that she just follows him around. Geist laughs and says jokes aside for now. He likes books, right? How about checking this place out? He hands him a flyer. The royal capital of Haybelk, the old shopping district of Luzon, the used book market. Geist says Loberia, the city of books, runs a used book market every year, and there might be rare copies there. Sounds like a good way to kill some time. Hayes says goodbye, leaves the office, and closes the door behind him. Prezia is standing right there and asks whether he is going, and clarifies that she means the used book market. He turns to her and asks whether she has been eavesdropping on his conversations again. She comes closer and says they can go their separate ways once they get there. He says, confused, that she can do whatever she wants. Later, in the old shopping district, he walks down the street noting that she really did run off on her own the second they arrived. He reaches a bookstore and decides to go in, and notes there really is a lot of material here. He goes along the shelves and finds the adventures of the S-rank adventurer Gerald, and wonders whether an adventurer like that genuinely existed. He could check that at the guild when he has time. He reaches for the book thinking he may as well read it for now, and touches hands with Sasha, who is reaching for the same book. Both of them apologize at exactly the same time. She is thrown when she sees him and apologizes again. He agrees calmly. Then there are a couple of seconds of silence, and she says his name, hesitantly, and Reynold walks up and greets her. Then notices Hayes and asks whether he came here too. He says his name and says you could put it that way. So, are the two of them on a date or something? She's extremely thrown by that question, and Reynold hugs her and says, smiling, that it certainly looks that way, which throws her further, and she asks him to wait, and says they are not on a date, nothing like that. He does not answer any of it, because Prezi arrives, says his name, and asks what is wrong and whether something happened. That surprises him briefly, and then he settles and says, smiling, nothing special. She says that is how it is then, and in that case they should get some tea or something, because she is already tired. He says that is probably from all the books she is hauling, and that she could hand him some. He takes the books off her and starts to leave. Sasha says his name, confused. He turns around and says goodbye in a completely cold tone. Later at a cafe, the two of them order food, and Prezi asks whether that girl was Sasha, his partner. He says nothing. So she says she remembers when she asked about them. They were childhood friends, were they not? He agrees and says it was once like that, and it does not matter to him anymore. She says his name and says she wants to ask one thing. Does he like that girl, or does he hate her? He flinches slightly and says that if she really found everything out, she should already know the answer. She almost destroyed him. Prezi says calmly that this is not true. He says it is possible and that either way, it is impossible to put anything back the way it was, and she thinks about that. He says it is impossible to put it back. Has he ever once tried? At the same time, in the deepest part of the highest level dungeon, Crane is fighting something very strong with his ability while loudly swearing about Sasha. The monster goes down, and he says he is definitely going to kill her. Then he snaps his fingers and says he has an idea. Why not have a stampede? It seems like it would be quite entertaining, and he cannot wait to see what kind of face that girl makes. He walks over to the monster and asks whether it is dying. It understands that is going to happen very soon, and if it does not want to die, then it knows what to do. 1 month later, the newspapers are writing that the Saints clan continues to make progress, and that the day when there are 5 great clans instead of 4 is already close. A group of young adventurers walks into the guild announcing that they are finally here. A worker sees them and says these are the people from 1000, and congratulates them on advancing to rank D. Their leader Roland thanks her, delighted, and she says they really have worked hard since joining the Saints. He laughs about that, and a girl named Kua slaps him and says, unimpressed, that this is not only his doing. He gets slightly worried and says of course he has not forgotten, and that this was only possible because of all of them. Tina says that, however, becoming a saint was truly amazing. Then remembers and says he was terribly nervous when they first arrived, which makes him nervous again, and he asks what he is supposed to do about that, because this was the Sasha clan. She laughs and says they respected and admired her too, so she understands. Mad says even he was nervous. She agrees. And Roland says happily that it is only a matter of time until they reach S rank 2. Kua slaps him and asks loudly what he is even talking about. Then the worker looks toward the entrance, notices Hayes, calls him over politely, and thanks him for his work today. Roland turns around fast and asks himself whether that could possibly be the S-rank loner, the harbinger of darkness. He is frightened enough on sight of him. Hayes goes to the counter and says here's the equipment he found on the metal goblin he killed. He asks that it be returned to the friends and family of its rightful owner. She asks whether he is absolutely sure, since technically ownership of these things transfers to him. He says he does not need it. Roland, mildly surprised, thinks about that. He turns out to be a surprisingly nice guy. Then Hayes remembers something and says here are the materials from the goblin as well. And Geist leans out over the second floor balcony and calls down that the royal family has summoned every S-rank adventurer, so he needs to go too. He starts to leave, and the worker says he can leave the materials with them for processing. He thanks her and says he leaves it to them. The members of 1000 watch him go and call him intimidating. Only Tenna calls him cool. Barbaro says he will not explain at length and asks to get straight to the point. Sitting in that hall are the barbarian clan master Jonathan, an S-rank adventurer, the battle mother Mamacha, and the judgment clan master Chaos. He says that for reasons unknown to them, the number of B-rank monsters is rising rapidly, and their high-level dungeon near the royal capital, the one Hayes previously explored, has been producing a great many disappearances lately, so this has to be brought to an end. Signs of a stampede have been found on the upper floors, which lands hard on that room, because a stampede is a sudden explosion in monster numbers caused by dungeon bosses breeding out of control. A catastrophe in which an enormous number of escaped monsters start attacking the towns and villages nearby. He calls Geist and asks him, if possible, to explain in more detail. Geist stands up and says that after the dungeon was opened to the public, a boss monster that is supposed to manifest on the 60th floor, a tyrant bombardier, started appearing on the 10th floor. And not only that, monsters that should only exist on the 40th or 50th floors began appearing far earlier, which in turn forced the monsters that belong on those earlier floors outside the dungeon entirely. Given where they currently are, it is extremely likely they are heading for the royal capital, Chaos asks, worried, how many of these monsters there are, and Geist gives them the last comparison anybody has. 30 years ago, a stampede occurred in a mid-level dungeon. About 20,000 monsters were suddenly unleashed. 3 cities in Heibulk were destroyed. Another 7 villages were wiped off the map. However, this time, it is a high-level dungeon. Honestly, it is hard to estimate how bad it gets. And there is exactly one way to stop a stampede. Exterminate every monster that has escaped. They make unhappy noises about that, and Mamacha says she thought so. Barbaros tells the guildmaster to begin requesting assistance from the adventurer guilds of neighboring countries. He says, seriously, that he will do it immediately. Then he calls Bonnet and tells him to prepare the troops. He agrees and leaves, and the king says this is a crisis of unprecedented proportions. If they do not unite here and now their country is lost, adventurers, they can only rely on them now. Mamacha says nobody knows how big this disaster gets, and it seems they need closer coordination between the clans. Jonathan says that is certainly true, and everybody works together and prepares for the stampede. Then Sasha asks whether it is possible to enter the dungeon early and kill the boss on the very bottom floor. And to her surprise, Chaos says immediately that it is impossible. She asks how he would know if nobody has even tried. He says he will tell her the reason. She only recently reached S rank, correct? The monsters inside that dungeon increase in rank by 2 whole levels. Every one of them would be monster food long before they reach the bottom. Then he turns to the guy in black and says that if he has any questions, he would be happy to. He does not finish, because Hayes was not listening, and is already walking out. Chaos Throne asks where he is going. Barbaros laughs and says that boy is always interesting. Muan, unimpressed, decides he really is as rude as ever, and Sasha watches him go with a worried look on her face. 10 days after that meeting, the news of the coming stampede is made public, and the Adventurers Guild suspends every quest it has. Further investigation says the stampede most likely arrives within a couple of days. The city's residents start evacuating. The adventurers start training, and on the day itself, Hayes goes to the innkeeper, puts a few coins on the counter, and asks whether he is not planning to evacuate the royal capital. The old man says that 30 years ago, a stampede went through his village. He witnessed it. He walks to the shelf behind him and says his daughter and her husband had a dream of opening an inn in the capital. He was here at the time, buying the inn, which is why he survived. He takes a photograph of his family off the shelf and says the village, his home, the place he lived his entire life, disappeared without a trace. Not even the bodies of his daughter, his son-in-law, or his grandson were left. As the survivor, he protects this inn and his daughter's dream to the very end. Hayes listens to all of it, then puts more coins on the counter. The old man says he has already paid for breakfast, and Hayes leaves and says calmly that this is for tonight. In front of the royal capital, Geist announces that roughly 70,000 monsters have been spotted, all of them running amok and heading for the capital. To protect the people's lands, their home, they hold here no matter what. The stampede has been sighted 5 kilometers out. Then a guard puts a spyglass to his eye and reports in a very different voice that there are 100,000 of them, and asks what anybody is supposed to do against a number like that, which is where the story catches up with itself. Because Hayes climbs the wall, tells them to step back and builds 2 rocket launchers out of nothing. He fires a volley into the incoming mass and puts several explosions through it, then throws the launchers away, takes out a machine gun, asks what they think about this, and starts cutting down the goblins running at the city. Sasha looks up at that and asks whether this is his ability, and Reynold looks at it with a smile and says he has amazing firepower. A bird passes over the battlefield, and Geist concentrates and announces that the long-range squads attack now. The archers open up, and a body of adventurers comes out of the main gate. Crane watches all of it from above the battlefield, smirking, and says it has begun. He spots Sasha and says she had better not die prematurely to the monsters, because he intends to deal with her personally. Then his attention goes to Hayes, and he asks what kind of weapon that is. He expected this fight to be considerably bloodier. This guy is ruining everything. Geist calls to the vanguard and tells them to prepare because everybody is counting on them. Mamacha steps forward, uses enlarge and puts an enormous axe blow through the line, then smirks and tells everybody to hold back. A large monster comes up behind her and is about to hit her, and Jonathan takes it with his vibrate ability and tells her she was completely open and should be careful. Chaos throws knives into the goblins using poison, smirks and says they are not that bad. And Crane lands on the ground next to Hayes, who dodges it. Crane says mildly surprised that he still managed to get out of the way. Hayes asks who the hell he is. He smirks and says he is the one who organized this stampede. Hayes looks him over and works out that this is the same demon Sasha reported. Crane, interested, asks whether he knows that girl. Hayes takes out his weapon and asks why that should matter to him. And Crane says, smirking, that he's going to destroy everything dear to her. However, this one is getting in the way, so he came to eliminate him personally. And since he knows her, that is even better. Then he releases a compressed stream of air. It lands. Hayes survives it and clicks his tongue. Sasha nearby spots the demon and calls to Reynold and says they need to pursue him. And then monsters come down on her, and she says they cannot pursue anybody in this state. At which point everybody on that field feels an earthquake. There is a giant monster walking toward the city. Reynold runs to her and says her name. Sasha looks over at Hayes wanting to help him, and closes her hand into a fist, because she cannot. She goes with Reynold instead and says they deal with that giant turtle. He agrees, and she decides seriously that they are leaving the demon to him. Crane watches that happen and says, smirking, that he should have a look. They abandoned him. Hayes silently puts a pistol round into him, The wind stops it, and Crane tells him to go easier, and asks whether he is stupid. If he had a report on him, he should already know that his wind powers are incredibly strong in open ground like this. Hayes changes weapon fast and fires again. The wind stops that too, and Crane laughs and says it is useless, so he takes out the grenade launcher and puts a round into him. There is a heavy explosion, and the demon defends with magic and says this strange ability of his appears to be utterly useless against his own. It does not matter how much firepower a man has if he cannot land any of it. Then he attacks with wind magic and asks loudly what he plans to do now, because they will be stuck here forever like this. Hayes slips the attacks and reaches the only useful thought available to him. He needs somebody to do something about that wind. And Prezia, hidden under magic, arrives behind him and says she is asking to be allowed to handle it. He should just hold his weapon steady the way he always does. He trusts her. He smiles, switches to a revolver, and takes aim. Crane says loudly that he already explained this. While his windshield is up, nothing thrown at it works. And Hayes says with a very confident smirk that of course he probably could not handle it alone. Prezia drops the concealment and pours everything she has into amplifying that one shot. Crane sees her and is startled and asks where this girl came from, because they are using wind magic to break through his wind barrier and neutralize it. The round goes through his head, and the last thing the demon does is wonder whether he genuinely just lost to some people. He goes down. Hayes says she helped him out, and Prezia says, smiling, that in that case he can treat her to tea as thanks, because she recently found a great restaurant. He asks whether food is genuinely the only thing she is interested in. Then their attention gets pulled by somebody shouting Sasha's name. She is badly injured and looking up at an enormous turtle with an exhausted face. Geist through the bird announces that every adventurer needs to pay attention because a new powerful stampede monster has appeared. It is called the King Turtle. Supposedly rank SS+, this is the crucial moment, and they hold. She puts everything she has into a sword strike on the thing, and leaves no serious damage at all. She jumps back and works out that it is simply too strong, and that her sword is bouncing off it. The monster puts a paw down hard, throwing up a wall of smoke, and Reynolds shouts and asks whether she is okay. She comes out of the dust saying she is fine, then looks around and does the honest read. Ever since the King Turtle arrived, they have been losing ground. If this continues, the monsters get into the city. He shouts a warning, and the monster is already on her, and it hits her in the back. She goes down, and goblins start closing around her, and Reynolds runs for her, and a huge monster steps into his path. He watches a goblin lining up on her and shouts her name, and at the last possible moment Hayes arrives and kills every goblin around her. At which point the turtle starts concentrating an enormous amount of energy. Reynolds sees it and knows this is bad and that he has to reach her, and cannot get past the thing attacking him, and understands he is too late. Sasha sees the turtle release a beam of energy straight at her. She closes her eyes and asks whether this is the end. Somebody shouts her name, and she is fine. She opens her eyes and finds Hayes standing over her, having taken it with his body. She stares at him and says his name. He is very badly hurt, and he goes down. She catches him, puts his head on her legs, and asks him loudly why he protected her. He should not have done that. He is still conscious, and he says she should not ask him. His body simply moved on its own. She starts crying, and he asks her whether they were not going to build the best team of adventurers in the world. She still carries their dream. She says she pushed him away, and he keeps pushing her forward anyway. He says that in his current state there is no possible way he beats that turtle. She can handle it. She remembers being a child, and him holding her up, and the same voice saying the same thing. He knows she can handle it, and she realizes he always believed in her. She says right. Now she understands. What is she even thinking? She picks up her sword and decides she is going to show him a fighting spirit that shines like gold. Then she turns to him with a confident smile, says his name, thanks him, and says she is going. She crosses the field faster than anybody watching can follow and cuts a horde of monsters apart with one swing. Reynolds sees it and cannot process it, because she just mowed down that many in a blink. She suddenly became stronger. The other adventurers ask whether that is what awakening looks like, and somebody says he believes it is. When a person overcomes a mental crisis, in extremely rare cases, their abilities suddenly become far stronger. He had only ever heard rumors. To think it is actually possible. She jumps very high, brings the sword around, and uses Golden Sword, Heavenly Fang, and cuts the giant monster in half. Then says seriously that not one of these monsters escapes her blade. Hayes watches that with a small smile, and loses consciousness, looking perfectly calm about it. He wakes up in a bed, sees a ceiling, and works out he is in a hotel. Prezia comes in asking whether he finally woke up, and wishes him good morning. He sits up and asks how he got here. She says she moved him with the help of the spirits, and that he can buy her tea as thanks later. She also gave him first aid. He asks what happened with the stampede. She says they handled it without any problems. Then he asks hesitantly what happened to Sasha. Prezia starts to answer, and Sasha walks into the room and asks how he is feeling. Prezia says he woke up a moment ago and that she will go get some water. Once she is out, Sasha asks about his wounds. He says it hurts a little and nothing is serious. She closes her eyes, gathers herself, and says she is truly sorry. He says she should not be because it was his decision, so it is not her fault. She says that is not what she meant. He remembers and asks whether she awakened her abilities, which puts her closer to her dream. That is good. She is startled by that, comes closer, says his name, and says he is probably wondering why she is saying this now. She wants him to come back to the Saints. He looks at her throne. And at that exact moment, Presea comes back and announces loudly that she is against it because he is part of her team. Both of them turn and look at each other. And Sasha asks what that is supposed to mean and points out that in case she did not know, he was originally on their team. Presea agrees loudly and adds that she also threw him out of it. Sasha has nothing to say to that. And Hayes says he does not need a team and is continuing on his own. Presea looks at Sasha, unimpressed, and says this is entirely her fault. Sasha is outraged and demands to know who she even is to him. And Presea says with a small smile that the two of them swore to each other and to fate itself to be together. Hayes lies there and notes calmly how noisy it is in here. However, perhaps a commotion like this is not always so bad. Then both of them turn to him and ask simultaneously and at volume which of them he is teaming up with. And he says loudly and unhappily that he explained he is staying alone. 6 months after the stampede, life is slowly coming back to the city. At the Saints clan, Sasha calls in the 1000 group and apologizes for summoning them so suddenly. Roland says worried that it is their duty. She says she has a task for them, a C-rank job to eliminate the Ogre King. They are C-rank adventurers now, so she thinks they can handle it. Do they think they can? He agrees happily and tells her to leave it to them. Sometime later, he is badly injured and things are bad.
Why are there 3 of them?
Every one of his people is completely exhausted and cannot fight anymore, and there is no possible way he beats 3 Ogre Kings alone. One of them starts on him and he closes his eyes and asks whether this is the end. And at that exact moment, Hayes kills all 3 of them with his weapon, then turns to them and asks whether she is all right. They look at him with open admiration. And he asks, wait, are these not the people from the Sasha clan? Roland comes over and thanks him at volume for saving him. He asks him to calm down. Tenna says it is simply incredible how fast he handled all of that. Mad says this is the ES rank. Then they mention that incidentally, he is apparently trying to become the strongest. Can they ask why he is doing it? She wants to hear it too. All of them agree that they want to hear it. So he sighs and says it is to conquer the 6 forbidden labyrinths, which stops them, because the 6 forbidden labyrinths are the 6 highest ranked dungeons in the world. The Great Labyrinth of Delmadrome, an enormous labyrinth buried underground. The Great Salt Lake of Diliromance, which has its own unique ecosystem. The Magnetic Forest, which holds a mysterious magnetic power that scrambles the senses. The Floating Castle, Arena Dustar, a flying castle that appeared at some point in the past. Mount Necrophantasia, a mountain range said to exist in the demon world. And finally, the Garden of the God, whose existence is mentioned only in myths and legends. They say the people who go into these never come back alive. Kua says the only ones anybody knows the location of are the Great Labyrinth Delmadrome in the Desert Kingdom of Disara, and the Great Salt Lake Diliromance in the lands of Frisida. Roland asks which of them he plans to conquer. He thinks about it and says that not everybody can challenge these without permission from the state. Besides which, who knows how long it takes. So the best he can do is keep improving and complete whatever tasks he takes on. Right now he is going back to the royal capital, and they ask, all of them delighted about it, whether once they are back in the capital he could have lunch with them as thanks for saving them. She wants to know more about him. They are asking him to join them. He apologizes confused and asks whether maybe next time. Sometime later, Hayes arrives at the royal hall, and Barbaros notices him and observes that he certainly was not in a hurry. He is the second person in all this time to be late for a meeting with him. He apologizes and says he does not like rushing things and proposes they get down to business, while privately noting that he went to a restaurant with the 1000 team and that they are the reason he is late. Barbaros says he would like to ask him to conquer one of the 6 forbidden labyrinths. The Great Labyrinth of Delmadrome, which genuinely surprises him because they are already at the point of taking on forbidden labyrinths. The king says that given his recent contributions during the stampede, he considers him fit to challenge the 6 forbidden labyrinths. He says he humbly accepts. Barbaros says that for questions about the Great Labyrinth, he should find the master of the Cavern King clan in Disara. Bargain has all the details. Bonet says he has prepared a letter and will help him. And Barbaros says he will pray for his return with good news. Hayes says he understands everything, says goodbye, and leaves the castle, then turns around and asks whether she was eavesdropping. Presea drops the magic, agrees, and asks whether he is going to challenge the 6 forbidden labyrinths, which is just like him. He keeps walking and says that this time she does not follow him. You never know what happens. It would be quite dangerous. She agrees and says she understands completely, which surprises him slightly, and she says, smiling, that he should not worry because she will not follow him. Even though she only recently became an A rank, in her current state she would probably only be a burden. He says that is fine then. She says she only wanted to let him know that it seems Sasha and her friends are going to try to conquer the Great Salt Lake Diliromance. He thanks her and starts to leave, then stops because she says his name. He turns around, slightly displeased, and asks what else she wants. And she asks, smiling, whether he will tell her everything when he gets back. He walks off with a small smile and says he will definitely tell her everything, perhaps over a cup of tea. She smiles at that and asks him to take care of himself. Sometime later in the desert country of Disara, Hayes comes into the guild and says he is here at the request of King Haybelk and that he needs to meet the master of the Cavern King clan. The worker smiles and asks for a minute to check. She leaves, and he stands there thinking about the Great Labyrinth. He has considerably more weapons in his arsenal now than he did before the stampede, so everything should go smoothly, assuming he makes no mistakes. Then a man walks into the hall and asks whether he is the one who dared to challenge the 6 forbidden labyrinths. He turns and asks whether his name is Bargain. He confirms it. And Hayes says he has been tasked with conquering the great labyrinth of Delmadrome, and asks whether there is anything he can tell him about the place. Bargain says seriously that he has nothing to tell him, and that he must go back where he came from. Hayes says this is a personal request from the king himself. Bargain does not budge and says he is not obliged to tell him anything. That man dropped this on him, so it is not his problem. He cannot allow somebody this young to walk into a forbidden labyrinth. Barbaro said he would send the S-rank adventurer who stopped the stampede, and in the end he sent a child. There is no way somebody like him pulls this off. And he is saying this as a man who has been inside a forbidden labyrinth himself. Hayes chuckles, and says to think that the master of one of the 4 great clans, the man everybody speaks about so enthusiastically, turned out to be a coward who ran out of the great labyrinth. The guild worker goes very pale, and Bargain gets extremely angry and asks him what he just said. Hayes starts walking out and says there is no point listening to some coward. He was right, he should go back. The worker goes paler, and Bargain grabs his hammer, swings it, and adds a substantial insult on top. Hayes reacts to it and gets out into the street. Bargain follows and asks whether he managed to avoid that one. Then closes on him very fast, swings again, and asks how about this. He gets clear of that too. And Bargain looks at him with a smirk, and says he is doing well for a youngster. So Hayes takes out a gun, points it at him, and tells him to stop playing around. He fires a few rounds, and Bargain's attention goes to the weapon in his hand, and he deflects every single bullet with the hammer. Hayes puts the gun away and looks at him, confused, and then, entirely unexpectedly, Bargain starts laughing very loudly. He walks over and says this is interesting. Just think, he has met another person using the same kind of weapon as Nobunaga, which stops Hayes cold, and he asks whether he means the one Lady Ibis loves. Bargain asks at volume whether that means he knows him. Hayes says, confused, that at least he knows the name. Bargain claps him on the shoulder, laughs, and asks what his name is. He gives it, and Bargain says his name back, and says, smiling, that in that case he will tell him everything he wants to know about the Great Labyrinth. Follow him. Hayes looks at him and asks what is even happening here. They go to the clan buildings to his room, and he offers him a seat and pours drinks. Then says he used to be on the same team as Nobunaga, which surprises Hayes, and Bargain says, along with the other masters of the 4 great clans, including Ibis, master of the Yggdrasil clan. All of them were originally on the same team as Nobunaga. She may be the way she is now. Before that, she followed him wherever he went. He was not simply a partner. He was a friend, and he could not ignore a man carrying the same weapon as his good friend. Then he puts the mug down hard, says his name, and says the reason he did not want him going into the Great Labyrinth was not about being rude. He shows him the wounds on his body and says he got these in the Great Labyrinth. The strength of the monsters in there goes beyond anything either of them can picture. Every comrade who went in with him died there. He was the only one who came out alive. Knowing all of that, does he still want to go? Hayes looks at him, seriously, and says that a long time ago he made a promise to one person that he would become the strongest, and that right now she is also going to challenge one of the 6 labyrinths, not to mention that he got stronger after the recent stampede, and he does not intend to fall behind. That is why he has to go, to become the strongest. Bargain looks at him and then says, at volume, that he really is exactly like Nobunaga. He does not listen to anybody at all. He stands up from the table and says he acknowledges his determination. So he will tell him everything he knows. The Great Labyrinth of Delmadrome can look like an ordinary dungeon. However, as he already said, the monsters in there are unlike anything he has ever seen. Adventurers who relax on the way in thinking this is an ordinary dungeon die the moment they enter. He takes out a map and says that even if he is lucky enough to actually get in, he will understand very quickly why this place is unlike other dungeons. It looks like another world. Strange iron boxes and all kinds of unknown objects scattered everywhere. Hayes points at the drawing and asks whether he means those iron boxes. He agrees and says that when he showed it to Nobunaga, the man said it looked like something out of his home world. Who knows why things from his world ended up inside the Great Labyrinth? Perhaps there is some connection. Hayes asks whether that means he did not know either. Bargain agrees. It seems he did not know about it either. And Hayes thinks that perhaps the other forbidden labyrinths also hold items from other worlds, and perhaps he learns something about his own abilities if he goes through this one. Bargain says that is practically all he knows. Information he paid for with his friends' lives. He knows how pathetic that sounds. And Hayes looks at him and rewrites his own assessment on the spot. He decided this was a coward who simply ran. That is not true. They risked their lives to bring that information out, so that the deaths of his comrades would not be for nothing. He says his name, bows, and asks to be allowed to take back what he said about him being a coward, and apologizes for saying it. Bargain says calmly that everything is fine and he is not offended. A young man like him does not need to be tactful at all. Hayes starts to leave. Smiling, thanks him for the advice, and says he will definitely clear the Delmadrome labyrinth. Then Bargain says his name and asks him to wait. He turns, and a girl comes into the room apologizing and saying she is sorry for being late. Bargain looks at her and says she has finally arrived. She apologizes again and explains she got too carried away sparring and ended up late. Bargain asks whether she is the second S-rank adventurer, Hijiri. She agrees, delighted, and Hayes looks at Bargain and asks what he means by that. She notices him, runs over, and asks, extremely pleased about it, whether he is the harbinger of darkness. Then starts inspecting him from several different angles, and says he looks quite strong. Bargain comes over and asks whether he has been listening at all, because Barbaros's letter says right there that he and another S-rank adventurer go through the labyrinth together. Hayes says loudly that he heard nothing about that, nothing at all. Bargain says it seems he has not changed in the slightest, and that this is an official request. However, should he not obey it? And Hayes says loudly that this does not mean he goes on a mission like that with some quirky girl. She grabs his shoulder, turns him toward her, and tells him that was rude. In fact, she even has a card. Did he see that? He looks at it, startled, and asks himself whether she genuinely is an S-rank adventurer. Bargain says his name and tells him to just accept it. And she puts out a hand with a friendly smile and says once again, her name is Hijiri. She would be happy to work with him. Bargain says amazed, whether that is Hijiri, the one with the adamantite fist from Oolong. Hayes grins at the sound of that, and the girl says, smiling, that it is her in person, and that she has also conquered 7 top-tier dungeons. He has probably heard about that, right? He answers gloomily that he knows nothing about her, or about Oolong. Hijiri stares at him and asks what. He turns to Bargain and asks what that is. Bargain says Oolong is a Western country where martial arts dominate, and it is full of hot-tempered people. There are plenty who are good at fighting and not very good at using their heads. And she adds that besides which, it is her homeland. He says, I see. She asks what exactly he means by that, although it does not matter because they will be like 2 peas in a pod until they overcome the Great Labyrinth. He says he does not work in a team, so he is going alone. She says indignantly that this will not do because she needs his help to get through this. He asks what, and she explains that Barbaros said he wanted her to go through the Great Labyrinth with Hayes. When His Highness told her that, she asked whether he meant the guy who was at the stampede. He said exactly. After that, they discussed the reward, and she asked the king for permission to duel Hayes. Barbaros looked at her, surprised, and said there was an incident long ago where a city was partially destroyed by a conflict between 2 adventurers. Duels are normally forbidden, however he is interested, and he will allow it. Hijiri was delighted and thanked the king, and he said that in that case he entrusts this to her. She assured him he can rely on her. And having laid all of that out, she looks at Hayes and says that is exactly why it will be a problem if he goes alone. He grins indignantly and thinks about Barbaros, that mean old man who always does whatever he wants. Bargain pats him on the shoulder and remarks that the king really does seem to like him. Hijiri says she will say it again. After completing the Great Labyrinth, please let him fight her. She wants to defeat every strong person alive and become the strongest. He is strong, right? He looks at her gloomily and says, pass, as he already said he is going alone, and he does not want to fight her. She says confused, what? Then he turns to Bargain, thanks him again, and says he will stop by before heading home. Hijiri begs him not to leave, at a volume that makes Bargain wince, and once both of them are gone, he says he hopes they both come back safely. Sometime later at a tavern, Hijiri orders 2 drinks and a large bear steak. She also orders boar stew with cream, and pasta with tomatoes and cuttlefish ink. Then thinks about it and adds fried red gesso meat and chen shark stew. Hayes asks, irritated, how long she intends to pursue him. She asks amazed how long, until the Great Labyrinth is completed and he fights her. He talks a lot, and he is just running away from her. He says he is not running away. She says that is precisely why she decided to follow him until then, so that it counts as the 2 of them going through it together, and then she gets to fight him. She is a genius. He notes, irritated, that first it was Presea, and now the others. He is surrounded by selfish people. The waiter arrives, apologizes for the wait, and covers the table and everything she ordered. Hijiri is delighted and says everything looks delicious. Then raises her mug and proposes a toast to the creation of their team. Hayes drinks without touching her glass. She is outraged and asks what he is doing and whether he could not at least have a drink with her. He says he does not remember collaborating with her in any way. She starts eating, washing it down, and mutters that he is such an uptight person and needs to relax a little. He puts his mug down and asks whether she understands that the Great Labyrinth of Delmadrome is not simply some ordinary complicated labyrinth. This is not a game. Even as S-ranked adventurers, they are risking their lives. She says even she understands that. She is an S-ranked adventurer. She knows the Great Labyrinths are extremely dangerous, and she is perfectly prepared to lose her life. Although she definitely does not want to die, because she cannot die until she fights him and takes the crown of the strongest. He asks himself, baffled, whether she is being serious. Then asks why she is this fixated on fighting him, because there are plenty of other people in the world. She says she already told him. She will defeat every strongest human alive and become the strongest. His exploits during the stampede were being discussed even in Oolong itself, defeating over 1,000 monsters single-handedly and finishing off a demon on top of it. She really did not expect him to refuse to fight her. He looks at her darkly, and she continues, saying that loners eventually become stronger than everybody else, exactly like her, and she thought he wanted to become the strongest. Then she takes a sip and remarks that duels are just a headache, in which case, what is his real goal as an adventurer? Which is a question he does not have a clean answer to anymore. Because before he thought about building the greatest and strongest team and helping people. That was his goal, and Sasha's goal. Over time, the gap between him and his friends grew, and he was thrown out of the team for being too weak. That is why he swore to become the strongest on his own, so that the weak would stop being ignored. And yet, ever since he met Presea, something has changed. Out loud, he says it does not matter. She says she was genuinely curious and tells him to just say it already, and then tries a new dish and starts screaming about why it is that spicy and how urgently she needs water. He looks at her. Later, they leave the tavern, and she laments what a hopeless person he is. The next day, they reach the dungeon area, which is loud and packed with people. Hijiri goes to a vendor selling fried meat and asks for two. Hayes asks whether there is genuinely a dangerous labyrinth nearby, because this place looks like a tourist attraction. She says that judging by everything, tourists come to see the Delmadrome Labyrinth, since it is also an archaeological site, then hands him meat and asks whether he would like it. He says, irritated, to stop following him. She eats hers happily, throws the skewers in a bin, and announces that the labyrinth is right there, and he says he understands. She takes off running and shouts that whoever gets there first wins, and that if she wins, he owes her a duel. He shouts, gloomily, that she does not get to decide that for him. They arrive, and she looks at the building and says, surprised that so this is one of the 6 forbidden labyrinths, the Great Delmadrome Labyrinth. Then, inside, she is delighted by how huge it is and runs ahead. He tells her not to run too far. She says it is all right, and he asks himself whether anything at all is going to be all right, given that he is challenging a forbidden labyrinth with her. Although for now the inside looks like ordinary ruins. This is still one of the most difficult dungeons in the world, and they stay on guard. Besides which, the sandy ground makes walking quite difficult. Then there's a strange sound, and Hijiri asks what that was, because her feet are sinking into the sand. He runs at her, working out that this is quicksand. She is going down fast and shouting that she is drowning, and asking why she cannot get out. By the time he reaches her, her head is almost gone. He thinks in a panic, just a little more, and at the very last moment he gets her hand, which he is briefly pleased about. Prematurely because he starts going down with her. He swears, and loses consciousness. Sometime later, Hijiri opens her eyes, sits up and asks where they are. Hayes, sitting next to her, asks whether she is awake. She says his name, confused, and looks around at ruins in every direction. He says that now they are in. There is no turning back. She says it definitely will not be easy. Then she looks at him and works something out. He could simply have left her, and instead he threw himself at her. She touches his hand and apologizes and says it was all her fault. He says they were planning to go down anyway, so it worked out for the best. She looks at him surprised and says he is a surprisingly nice guy. He makes a skeptical noise, and she hugs him around the shoulders, happily, and announces they need to keep going. He says gloomily, too close. On the road, a fallen traffic light catches their attention and she asks what it is. He thinks he has seen it in the recordings and says he thinks it is some kind of signal. She says that is pretty convenient, then points at a car and asks what that is. He says a car. Then they find a motorcycle, and he notes, surprised, that it is exactly as Bargain described. There are traces of another world in this labyrinth. Then monsters appear, and he takes a stance and identifies them as black goblins. Hijiri stops him and points out that he just saved her. Could he leave these for her to warm up on? He says surprised, of course. She stands up, stretches her arms out, shouts forward and turns on her skill, which is his first look at her power. Metal Master is one of the Impa Master abilities. It lets her use various minerals out of the earth and manipulate them at will. She laughs and names it her grandmother's wing style Bajikwan, a technique only she can use, combined with Metal Master. She activates it and scatters her opponents. They come off her throws like balls and knock each other down. Then she shouts that now they get what they deserve, and destroys every single one of them, and asks cheerfully how he liked that, and whether it was not amazing. Before she can enjoy it, more monsters start coming out of everywhere. She shouts no, and attacks and damages them. She looks completely thrown, so he tells her not to drop her guard and explains it, because black goblins attack in small groups first, then commit everything specifically to make the enemy relax, while the rest hide underground waiting for the right moment. She catches her breath and says, not bad. He says he will lead, while privately noting that even a third-rate adventurer would know that. Later they run into golems which go down in a flash. The next monsters are killer rabbits. Hijiri sees one, gets extremely excited about how cute it is, and charges the enemy with her arms out. He watches this and asks himself what she thinks she is doing. 12 days later they take a rest, and he pitches a tent, lights a fire, and cooks. Hijiri devours it and thanks him and says it is so delicious and his cooking is something special. He thanks her and goes quiet. She notices and says she has to say it, because the tone was really strong. He uses all kinds of different weapons she has never seen before. He mutters, as did she. She continues smiling and asks whether he will duel her once they get out of here. He says no. She sighs indignantly, and he asks why she wants to fight him this badly, since there are plenty of other people in the world. So she tells him, she was an orphan. She was left at the door of the Wing Dojo. Her grandmother, who was an instructor there, took her in and raised her. And the Wing style is a martial art her grandmother built out of many different styles and turned into something of her own. However, she was bullied for being a woman. Nobody wanted to become her student, so an orphan child was raised to be her successor. The training was hard, and she enjoyed it. Her grandmother seemed to enjoy it too. She always said that even women can clench their fists. People around her called her weak and useless purely because she was a woman. It is okay to clench your fists. It is okay to become the strongest. Becoming strong was her grandmother's dream, and on the day she signed up as an adventurer, her grandmother passed away. Sitting in a chair with a smile on her face, so she wants to prove it. that her grandmother's martial arts were the strongest. That is why she wants to fight him. He listens to all of it, then remarks that by defeating the strong, she becomes the strongest herself. She agrees and says, pretty simple, right? And he says that in that case, he refuses. She exhales in irritation and says he is not that easy to break, and it occurs to him that she also wants to become the strongest in her own way. Exactly like Sasha, and he cannot help her with that. He gets up, goes into the tent, and says they have a lot to do tomorrow, so she should hurry up and go to bed. Hijiri says absolutely. On the 13th day, they are descending again, and she notes the great labyrinth really is enormous since no matter how far down they go, the boss is nowhere in sight. He says that besides which, the monsters get stronger the deeper they go. She says she wishes the boss would simply come to them, and he notes, surprised, that an adventurer should not say things like that. Then she gasps and points and asks whether that is the entrance to the next floor. There is a doorway ahead. She runs at it, wondering what awaits them down there. He tells her not to run too far, and on the next floor they look around, and she asks, astonished, whether these are the ruins of another world. There are buildings everywhere with infrastructure nobody here recognizes. Later they make camp, and while he is putting food on plates, he notes that he heard a great many things from Bargain, and never thought he would run into an entire other world down here. After they eat, they move on, and he wonders whether this great labyrinth was originally inhabited by people from another world, or whether they were summoned, exactly like his weapons. Then Hijiri points at a spear frozen inside ice, and asks whether it does not look like his weapon. He says yes, because his weapons are apparently from another world too. She says so that is how it is, then has a thought and voices it. If she defeats him, she gets to conquer another world. He tells her to take her time. They reach a place where everything has been torn apart, and she says, surprised, that it looks like there was a serious fight here. He agrees and asks whether it was humans against monsters, until they do not know. He touches the wooden partitions and finds a staircase, and says it looks like you can go down from here. Hijiri cheerfully tells him to go ahead, and once they are down, she asks, surprised, whether this floor is underground. He wonders what kind of strange dungeon this is, because it is clearly different from the usual. Mysteries everywhere. It reminds him of how he felt the day he received Weapon Master. Then he covers his nose and asks what that smell is. Hijiri, also holding her nose, agrees and says her nose is itching. The next moment, something attacks them, and they barely get clear of an enemy they cannot see. He has no idea what that was. The attacks keep coming, and finally they get a look at it, and it is a terrifying thing shaped like an enormous worm. He asks whether that is what smelled so bad. The enemy comes halfway out of the ground with a horrible noise and opens its mouth. He asks what that is because he has never seen anything like it, not even in the guild's bestiary. Hijiri, who dislikes anything that crawls, decides it looks like a snake and is disgusting, and then says she has seen that somewhere before. He turns on his magic and attacks. The monster closes its mouth and takes no damage at all. He notes, surprised, that the bullets bounced, and she says she remembers because this monster apparently has incredibly tough scales. He asks where she is getting this from. She says her grandmother knew a great deal about magical beasts, and once showed her a drawing of something similar, and said it had terrifyingly tough skin. This enemy is incredibly fast, and its weak point is the core in its mouth. She always took that half-heartedly. They really do exist. The monster comes again. They both dodge, and he asks who exactly her grandmother was. She says her mentor was an incredible person. He asks again where the weak point is. The core, in its mouth. He looks into the open mouth, finds a dark spot, and asks whether that is it. Hijiri shouts that she will hold the monster, turns on Metal Master and goes at it, then shouts his name. He does not waste a second, puts the weapon on it, and fires straight into the core. As the thing collapses, she says, amazed, that even if it is a weak point, finishing it in one shot is something. He looks at her and says they need to go, and she says, delighted, that she cannot wait to fight him. Later they meet another monster nobody recognizes, and he says he does not know that one either. And Hijiri, going back through her grandmother's stories again, says this one's weak point is the core in the center. If that is not destroyed, it respawns forever. They destroy it, and that becomes the pattern for the whole descent, because they keep running into monsters nobody has cataloged, and thanks to her, he keeps learning exactly where to shoot. Some have weak points in their backs, others in their legs, or their horns, and then they run into another terrifying thing, and she cannot remember its vulnerability, which irritates him considerably. It is shaped like an octopus with a single eye in the middle of its body, and it starts attacking, and they spend a while dodging tentacles. She suggests that maybe it is that eye. He says sarcastically that it is obvious. She snaps that she could not think of anything else, so he sighs and says it cannot be helped, then starts hitting the thing in various parts of its body until something finally works. The monster bursts, and covers both of them in its contents. Hijiri shudders and says this could not possibly be worse. He does not enjoy it either. Later in the shower, she says that bringing a shower along was so thoughtful. He, in the next stall, says it is perfectly normal. She says no way, because she did not prepare anything at all. He says that after all, this is a very difficult dungeon. She continues, and says that on top of that he's an excellent cook, and that he is one of those people who can do everything. He says he put in a lot of effort in order to somehow compensate for his weakness. She says, startled, weakness, because he is incredibly strong. He admits he used to do all the team's chores, and that after he was thrown out of that group, he worked out how to use his abilities and got stronger. She says cheerfully that everybody has their own skeletons in the closet, and he goes embarrassed and asks himself why he opened up like that. Perhaps this expedition reminds him of the time when he only dreamed of being an adventurer, or perhaps he simply relaxed because of how carefree she is. Then she asks the question, which is why he was thrown out at all, if he was otherwise useful. If she had been his partner, she would never have abandoned him. At which point the hot water goes cold and she squeals. And he notes that she let her guard down. Later they set off again, and the next place is a boiling lake, which they go around carefully. She remarks on how hot it is and what a strange place this dungeon is. Then they find a Ferris wheel, an enormous metal bridge, and other structures. She says, confused, that this is different from what was above and asks whether these are also buildings from another world. She wonders whether the dungeon boss is in there, at which point a voice arrives, making a sound neither of them can parse. He tells her it certainly seems so and says they need to go. They approach the source of the voice, walking through broken carousels and the rest of a former amusement park. She says, surprised, that it is only strange structures. And a voice says wow, and that he never thought people would come here. For a start, let him praise them for being able to descend this far. They look at him and prepare for a fight, and Hayes asks who he is. The demon bows and apologizes for his tactlessness. His name is Roshinante, and he is one of the great demons. Hijiri watches him very carefully, and Hayes registers the word demon. Roshinante says he is very sorry they have only just met, because they will have to become food for his cute pet. He snaps his fingers and the aura in the room changes and there is a strange sound. Something is approaching. Roshinante spreads his arms theatrically, and an enormous multi-headed dragon comes up beside him and roars. Its heads writhe and lunge at them. She shouts about how many heads it has, and he is shocked too, because it is an 8-headed dragon. The thing roars again in several voices at once, and Roshinante grins and stares at the people who came to him. Hijiri grimaces and asks what kind of abomination this even is, because she cannot stand anything that crawls. He tells her now is not the time, and Roshinante says it is his pet, Yamada no Rochi, one of the creatures known as the 7 Great Disasters. She repeats that back, amazed. The demon chuckles and says it seems the young lady knows. Hayes asks what the hell that is, and she explains it, and it is the worst possible answer. Her grandmother told her that most magical beasts have a weak point, and hitting that weak point defeats them easily. However, there are powerful creatures that do not have one. They once destroyed the ancient people, and they were called the 7 demons. Those are the monsters known as the 7 Great Disasters, and if she ever encountered one of them, she was not to try fighting. She was to run. That is what her mentor told her, and now she cannot believe one is actually standing here. Roshinante says this creature has taken up residence as the guardian of the 6th Forbidden Labyrinth, which Hayes registers with alarm because that word is guardian. The demon continues and asks whether it is not a shame to leave a force capable of wiping humanity off the face of the earth sitting here gathering dust. He decided to use it to achieve their goals, which is exactly why he came here. Hijiri asks what on earth he plans to do with this vile crawling thing, and says she is certain he has nothing good in mind. The demon chuckles and says it may not sound very pleasant to them. Their goal is the destruction of all humanity. Both of them stare at him, and she repeats it back, because the destruction of humanity. Roshinante chuckles and asks whether they are surprised, and says trying to save humanity is reckless, and Hayes says flatly that he talks too much, and he has already had enough. The demon says, wow. Hayes continues. He does not care about their goals. Hijiri asks what he is even talking about, because this is their destruction. Does he understand that? This cannot be unimportant. She has not even fought him yet. He pulls a pistol, aims it at the dragon, and finishes the sentence. He is unconcerned about whatever they are planning. What concerns him is that this vile creature is the guardian of this place. Then he fires, and the bullet bounces off. Not a single scratch. From ammunition with excellent penetration. The dragon is enraged by it, and Roshinante says, surprised, that this weapon, really, is that a firearm? Hayes reloads and prepares to fire again. She shouts, frightened that he knows about his weapon. He tells her calmly to shut her mouth, then decides that since that did not work, he hits it with something more powerful. He readies a projectile with a heavy warhead and fires it. There is a loud bang and a wall of dust and smoke, and when it clears, the dragon is still completely unharmed. He swears and reaches for another weapon, and the demon says with real interest that that is what his ability is. Crane mentioned it. The 7 Great Disasters would be enough on their own, and his weapon would also be useful for destroying humanity. So he will subjugate it with his telepathy skill and take it with him. Hayes asks whether that means he is manipulating this monster with that skill too. Roshinante remarks that calling it manipulation is a little crude. He would say the two of them are connected by heart and think alike. Then he activates the ability and tells him to come along. Hayes fights it and goes down onto his knees. Roshinante tells him to humble himself and submit, and Hijiri turns on the demon and says this human is her comrade, so he should not even think about taking him. He does not get to do whatever he wants. She activates her ability and attacks. The dragon takes no damage from that either. She notes irritated that it is too durable, and Hayes makes an annoyed noise, because the influence appears to have slipped off him. Roshinante takes something like a pointer out of his inside pocket, and prods the dragon with it. The monster is enraged and knocks the girl a considerable distance with its head. He catches her, and once she has recovered, she thanks him. He says he should probably be thanking her, because she saved him. She grins and says that even so, this snake is a real hindrance. Neither of them says anything else. They both take a stance again. The demon says pity. They should simply have resigned themselves and obeyed. Humans are so stupid that they make him sick. If they thirst for a quick death that badly, he will grant the wish. He waves the pointer and tells the dragon it is feeding time. The dragon obeys with a wild roar, comes in, and drops its head to eat them. They get clear. He swears and she says, disgusted, that it wriggles so vilely and that it is simply revolting, as if it were just a snake with 8 heads. Then large black scales come down from above and very nearly kill both of them. Hijiri dodges, closes her fist, charges, and shouts at the dragon not to be arrogant. She puts a strike into one of the heads and has to shake her own hand out afterward and asks how strong this thing is. The monster opens its mouth and covers her in something. She screams that it is melting, and he shouts that it is acid and to be careful. She gets it off and runs back to him. Then the heads start attacking them one at a time, and every pass makes it harder to get clear. She remarks irritated on what a pesky creature this is, and he puts a round into one of the heads lining up on her. She is delighted and announces the first one is ready. The dragon shakes its head, scatters those heavy scales, and stares at him. And he realizes, thrown, that even that did not work. Rocinante says it is useless because normal physical attacks have no effect on his pet. Hijiri mutters that if only she could pierce those scales, and Hayes swears, because if no weapon can beat this monster, then he does not beat it with the junk he is holding. The demon calls the dragon in to finish them. It answers the command with a roar. He grins in confusion and tries to put damage into it again. And the dragon comes at him with everything and he barely gets out of the way. Looking at what is in front of them, he swears again and says their attacks do not work at all. At this rate, they simply lose. Hijiri was right. They do not have the weapons to defeat something like this. He thinks about Prisia and notes that at this rate he cannot keep pace. And Rocinante says he has had enough of this game and tells the dragon to stop playing with them and finish it. The monster roars with fresh energy and goes at him. He tries to dodge and the blow catches him and he goes down. Hijiri attacks the thing, shouting his name in real fear. The dragon comes at both of them again. He shields her and gets them to a safe spot. The blow rams the ground and tears a deep furrow in it, and the whole area fills with dust. And when it clears, the demon looks around and cannot find them, and asks whether they are playing hide and seek. Well, he will play with them a little longer. They watch from cover while the monster moves chaotically. Hijiri, holding her wounded arm, asks him, unhappily, why he shielded her. If something happened to him, she would not be able to fight, would she? He says now is not the time to talk about that. And she smiles and tells him not to worry, because she is going to become the strongest adventurer. He takes out a handkerchief to bandage her arm, and thinks that in the end he has not changed at all since then, and that Sasha is getting closer and closer to her goal. He needs strength, even more strength. Enough to be unbeatable. Then he remembers Hijiri's question. Why did he become an adventurer? Why did he do it? Back then, in that cemetery looking at Sasha crying, he decided he would protect her, so that nobody would ever dare hurt her again, so that the weak would stop crying. He would become strong, stronger than everyone, stronger than anyone. That is why he wanted to be an adventurer. He says it out loud. He is going to become the strongest, and a small magic circle opens in his hand, out of which a book appears in the air in front of him,